G'day, Ziggy here, CEO of 3P, and I have with me Director of 3P Accounting and Tax, Chris Borg. Chris, hello to you.
Welcome again for another
Welcome
video.
again.
Welcome
Now, what
again.
we're going to do tonight is there've been some major announcements, particularly out of Victorian government level, but we've also had the Jobkeeper 2.0 that kicks in at the end of this month, and we just want to identify a few issues around that, or a few topics that businesses really need to be aware of. So, Chris, let's kick off with the Jobkeeper 2.0. What exactly? Because that legislation went through earlier this week, didn't it?
It did. Well, the announcements were a few weeks ago. However, literally, I believe it was Tuesday when the legislation passed, giving the set of rules and how it's all worked, and then giving the Commissioner sort of the powers and discretion to define what turnover is and the alternative tests, improved forms. We've got a lot of the detail now that's come through. We're still waiting. With not a lot of time, mind you, left before the extension starts. But yes, the majority of it is now known and passed as legislation.
Now, is it automatic that you'll get people that are receiving JobKeeper currently? Will they automatically get JobKeeper 2.0?
Unfortunately, no. Look, in the majority of cases, or certainly in a lot of cases, or employers or businesses will requalify for JobKeeper, but it does need to be retested. So, and like the first, you retested it back in March, and there's going to be 2 further retest periods. So, retest period at the end of this month, at the end of the current JobKeeper, which will take us through to the start of January, I believe the 3rd of January. And then there'll be another testing period from the 3rd of January to the end of March. So essentially 2 more testing periods. And you may find some organisations or businesses that were eligible first round may not be eligible for the second round. And you might get businesses that are eligible the first 2, but will not be eligible for the third as it continues to drop off.
Okay. So what's your advice to businesses then in terms of going through that test and working out whether they're eligible? Is that something they do themselves, or should they be coming to their accountants?
Well, again, like the first JobKeeper, if you're confident and able to do it yourself, then obviously you can. However, like anything, these rules can be tricky to get your head around. It's never black and white. So certainly going to your advisor, like we encourage all of our clients to do, just come through to us to run through the test. But not only that, making sure that you've got all your documentation in order. So we'll discuss a little bit about, as an overall thing, what are those tests that you need to look out for, and what is the documentation you need? Because if you do miss a test or don't get a test right, or you don't have the paperwork in order, then you will, even though you believe you might be eligible, you may fall foul of the rules and then become ineligible and maybe having to pay the JobKeeper back. So it's really important to get your homework in order, and that may mean, again, getting onto it now and retesting, or going and approaching your advisor if they haven't approached you already, to make sure that you do requalify again.
And I guess the other thing is that if they do their own calculations, some will get it right, but some may not. And in fact, some may actually find that they think they're ineligible when they're eligible. So as Chris says, I think it's important to, speak to your advisor and get some assistance there. Now, Chris, just the tax office actually came out, because when it was looking at GST turnover and sort of the tests around that, the tax office has come out and clarified that and said that this seemed a bit silly initially, but then you explained it to me earlier and it made a bit of sense. Just in terms of that the GST should be recorded when the services are actually provided, rather than when it's invoiced. So I imagine, is that something that's going to have an impact on a lot of business, or is it for maybe the larger businesses?
Look, it certainly will. And I think we should probably put the GST turnover, for people who are watching this and may not understand why we're talking about turnover for JobKeeper. So as a reminder from our earlier videos and discussions we've had, the whole point of looking at turnover is to become eligible for JobKeeper and to continually become eligible. You need to meet a decline in turnover test, which is essentially what Ziggy just mentioned, talking about what turnover is. Originally, that was 30% for businesses up to a certain threshold, and larger businesses a 50% drop-off, and charities and non-for-profits a smaller drop-off again. So originally, when you did your test back in March, April, you only had to have a drop-off once, and that essentially made you eligible from the time you had that drop right through to September. And in most cases, if businesses had that requisite 30%, which is the majority of businesses out there, drop off, that took them right through to now, in September. Now, under the next JobKeeper 2.0, you need to retest that now, and then you'll need to test it again after 3 months it continues. So the tests are, you look at your July to September turnover, and we'll explain what that means in a minute for the moment for 2020, and you compare that to the same quarter last year, July to September 2019.
So earlier this year, the comparison was a monthly comparison. Is it now a quarterly comparison, or is it still the months within that quarter?
No, it's definitely a quarterly one. In saying that, the turnover test back in the original one, there was quite a few. So there was monthly, so essentially looking at, because when JobKeeper was announced, it was towards the end of March, start of April. So you could look at your March actuals compared to your March 19. You could look at your April projected and look at your April 19. Or if you'd failed there, you can look at your April to June 20 projected compared to your April to June 19 actuals and get that drop. That essentially made you eligible straight away. So you had quite a few options, and if you failed there, then you just continually test until you had that drop off, and then you entered. This time is not as many options, and I think they've done that for a couple of reasons. One, to simplify it, and two, to stop organisations potentially manipulating the test to make it work. And there has been a couple of higher profile organisations that were caught doing that. So essentially what we're saying is the GST turnover, and this can become difficult, it probably won't affect a lot of the businesses out there. It will affect some. Unintentionally, it will affect some businesses in that they will have that drop off when they really haven't, because what it is they'll look at the turnover when you derive the service and finish the service rather than when you invoice. And the reason why they brought that out without them coming out and stating it specifically is because back on original JobKeeper, there were organisations that were deriving the work, and let's say they're trying to get the drop off in April for 30% or more. Don't have the demand, they have the work for April, but then they might go, oh, hang on a minute, let's invoice in May to make sure we have that drop off of 30%. So by bringing this, essentially close the loophole. Unless you're prepared to defer the work and further delay your invoicing and payment, then you're going to fail. You're going to have to record it. Now, a lot of you, and we've always said, when it comes to this, you're either eligible or you don't. So don't try and manufacture a result. That's always never a good thing, because the ATO have whether it's JobKeeper, whether it's audits, it doesn't matter, income tax audits, work-related deductions, I've always gone back to that, or company boards, they have the analytics to know when something's out of whack. So
yeah, very sophisticated these days, aren't they?
Exactly. So you can try and play around the edge, but you'll get it. So essentially, it's to stop that from happening. Well, if you've derived it, even if you want to delay it to the next month you're invoicing, you will still be tested as if the turnover happened in that quarter. Now, for the majority of businesses, I'm certainly one of them, I'm telling you, as soon as I finish a job, I want to invoice it because I want to get paid. So for the 90% of the business, probably 90 and 95% of the businesses out there, it's not going to be an issue, because generally when you derive the services, when you do the invoice anyway, okay? But it will affect some organisations who may derive a service and legitimately can't invoice until the next month for whatever reason. They will unintentionally get caught up in this.
So just to finish off on the JobKeeper part, it makes sense that there's going to be a retesting because the rate's changing come January to March
Yeah,
next year.
yeah.
So there'll be some further testing that people will
Absolutely.
need to go through.
Absolutely. So again, there's a turnover test, which is very, very strict in terms of you have to do it now when you derive the service, which is generally when you invoice. You don't have the choice of an accruals or cash basis anymore. So it's when you derive the service. Again, that probably lines up with your invoicing anyway. One of the things that the Commissioner hasn't come out with is necessarily the alternative test yet. We're still waiting because we're for businesses, for instance, that weren't in business from July to September last year, so don't have a comparative period. So we're still waiting. That should come out before the 28th, we hope. And another thing is that there's different rates for the JobKeeper this time. So obviously, previously with JobKeeper, every eligible employee, if they were eligible, would get $1,500 a fortnight of JobKeeper, regardless of the.
What's that coming down to now?
Yeah, so that's now changing. So there's going to be a couple of different rates now in regards to the JobKeeper, and it's all going to be dependent on the amount of hours that an employee worked in a particular period. So there's what they call a full rate and a partial rate. So for the next testing period, the next tranche of JobKeeper, which is the 28th of September 2020, which is Monday week, so Sunday the 3rd of January 2021, if you're on a full rate, you'll get $1,200 per fortnight per employee. Partial rate is $750 per fortnight. From then Monday the 4th of January 2021 to Sunday the 28th of March 2021, the full rate will drop to $1,000 per fortnight and the partial rate $650 per fortnight. So those are the rates. How do you determine whether an employee is a full rate or a partial rate? So what you then need to do is have a look at the hours of a particular employee for a 4-week period. Okay, so first of all, for a 4-week period, an employee would have had to work on average 20 hours or more a week to get the full rate. If they were over that, you get the full rate. If they were under that, then they will then get the partial rate. Now, the testing periods, when you look at the hours, the testing rate for employees is either 1 March 2020 or 1 July 2020 for those hours. Now, 1 March for any employee who was employed in the business and was eligible for JobKeeper early on. The 1 July 2020 is for any employees who became eligible from that point in time. And a lot of you recall, but the government announced particularly when Victoria went into further lockdown and the second wave came, the federal government extended JobKeeper for any employees that were employed as of 1 July 2020. It was 1 March 2020, then it changed to 1 July. So employees who were already employed as at 1 March 2020, that's the hours you look at, the 4 preceding weeks on average. For any employees that became eligible after that time, so they were employed anywhere between 1 March to 1 July 2020, you look at the preceding 4 weeks from 1 July 2020 to determine the amount of hours of work. So another change, so you've got, as a summary, you've got to change to turnover. You've got to change that you now need to retest twice, and it's now hours tested, whether you get a full rate or a partial rate. So based on that, there's a bit of work to do. There's going to be a bit of work for businesses and their advisors, as the system tends to work. And one other thing we're waiting on is the documentation. We're still waiting on guidance from the Commissioner on the documentation that's going to be required, where again, the discussion and the assumption is going to be that the nomination forms that were utilised back in the first round of JobKeeper will be fairly similar this time around. So again, all employees are going to have to probably sign a nomination form again and keep that on file. That's what we're expecting.
Okay, so there's still a lot of technicalities, a lot of changes that you've mentioned there. So that's JobKeeper 2.0 and the changes that are coming in. You mentioned there I guess the tax officers, the stats that they get, their intelligence. It was interesting because when there have been a lot of people who have drawn their $10,000 out of superannuation, who ended up recontributing it back into superannuation. And I just read last week the tax office is writing to all those people, probably seeking an explanation. So and that's something that can easily be tracked. So they're they're onto it, aren't they?
Absolutely, okay. And yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So now on to, you mentioned the lockdown, which is where we are in Victoria, and given that we've had this severe lockdown, the Victorian government earlier this week has come out with some grants and the total stimulus support funding, and a total $3 billion, which is a large amount. And it sounds like a large amount, but it's interesting. Let's break it up a bit. I mean, from my reading, it sort of came into three parts. One is just helping businesses survive during this period, and that was just over $1 billion. And then there was about 45 million, which was helping businesses adapt to this environment. There's obviously a belief out there, which makes sense, that there's going to be this type of environment going forward, or some type of some variation of this type of environment. They want to encourage businesses to be more online. And the third area was in relation to just deferring mainly payroll tax and waiving some fees and tax. And that was about 1.8 billion. But let's talk about, I guess, some of the practicalities of it, which are really in relation to the business support fund. So we know that the Vic government has been giving businesses that are eligible that $10,000. But you want to just talk through what are the changes now and the eligibilities around that for this period in time?
Yeah, so specifically about the grants that have been coming out.
Yeah.
So absolutely. So the Victorian government's spun it as a business resilience package. So clearly to stay resilient during this lockdown. And look, well, what we're seeing, hopefully, with the case numbers, even as of today, dropping again. Fingers crossed they continue, and we can start to open up and get some towards. Well, I think business as it was, or life as it was, probably won't be the case, but certainly a COVID normal. So, as you referred to, you are referring to a small and medium-sized business grant, or they call the third round of business support fund, which they're budgeted at $822 million. So for people out there who are in business or heard of it, there's currently been two grants that have come through from the Victorian government at $10,000 each. The first one was when the pandemic first started. It was a $10,000 grant. It was fairly restrictive, though, to businesses that were severely impacted by the pandemic. So more your hospitality, tourism, gyms and things like that had to actually stop. However, what they'll find in the government is that, businesses, it was too restrictive. So then they opened it up, the first round, for any businesses that were on Jobkeeper, who were eligible for Jobkeeper. And so that opened it up a little bit and made it a bit easier. Then when we went into stage 3, the government announced another $10,000 grant, and that pretty much opened it to any businesses in Victoria that were and the Mitchell Shire that were under stage 3. They got a $5,000 grant. When we went to stage 4,
you still had to be on Jobkeeper for that, right?
Yeah, so I'll just mention the criteria in a moment, just sort of more context. In that when we went into stage 4, any businesses were in Melbourne metropolitan area, then that went to 10,000. So what's happened now is, with the further extension of stage 4, the government has announced this round 3, which opens up on the 18th of September. So in order to get the support, there's going to be grants that range from $10,000 to $20,000, and they're broken up into 3 branches. So eligible businesses, and we'll talk about what an eligible business is in a moment, will receive $10,000 if their annual payroll is less than $650,000, $15,000 if its payroll is between $650,000 and $3 million, and $20,000 if it's between $3 million and $10 million. So probably, as you can gather, it's targeted towards businesses that employ. Right? Being resilient, keeping your employees on, is clearly an incentive. So how to get that grant is you need to operate a business located within Victoria. So now we're this video hopefully going Australia wide. We're just talking about our Victorian businesses here. They have to participate, as you said, in the Jobkeeper. All right, so you must be either have enrolled and or have received monthly Jobkeeper. Okay, so if you haven't looked into Jobkeeper and you believe you might be eligible, this might be an incentive, a further incentive. You need to employ people, as I said, and be registered with WorkSafe, and have had an annual payroll of less than $10 million in the 1920 year. So hence why that range goes from 10 to 20,000 is payroll from anything less than 650,000 up to 10 million. Business needs to be registered for GST, have an ABN, and be registered with a responsible federal or state regulator, i.e. ASIC. All right, so that's, again, have an ABN or something like that. So that's what, that's the criteria. So again, pretty much if you're operating in Victoria and you're receiving Jobkeeper and you employ, chances are you're going to get that grant. Like any of these grants and any of these Jobkeeper, what it has done, whether I think it's probably intentional, maybe it's an unintentional consequence, is again, and I've said this in previous videos, it's making businesses who might have been a bit slack with their record keeping, with their payroll, with their work cover registrations, actually get onto that now, where they may not have before, to receive these grants. And I've seen it in real life, practically, where the businesses who may not have had work cover have made sure they've had it now to get this. So yes, they're giving these incentives, at the same time, it's making businesses look at their own affairs to make sure that they are doing the right thing. So it does have some good unintentional consequences as well. So as I mentioned before, with this grant, the application's open from Friday the 18th of September. So you go to the Victorian Government Business website and you can apply.
So one of the things that I guess the government copped some criticism for, or there was some debate around, was that there was grants to be given for sole traders. And I was reading somewhere that it ended up that, or it looked like it was only going to be about 8% of sole traders that would be eligible for this $3,000 grants. You want to just go through, I guess, is it a straight $3,000 grant? What's the eligibility around that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the Sole Trader Support Fund. There's not a lot of detail on that at the moment. I think they've probably put a lot of their efforts into this business support fund or extended grant. But from what we can see at the moment, there's going to be a grant of up to $3,000 for over 30,000 eligible sole traders, but in certain industries: retail, accommodation, food services, creative and media, hairdressing, gyms, events, education and training, who operate from a commercial premises or location as a tenant. So essentially, those sort of sectors who are really being hard hit by lockdown, that appears to be where it's heading at the moment.
Yep. Okay. All right. So there's some decent announcements in relation to these grants and these support packages, and obviously a lot more to change between now and Christmas and even into the new year, and who knows what else comes out. Although what we can see, certainly at a federal level at least, that as they reduce the Jobkeeper payments down and the eligibility gets a little bit tighter, that obviously we're coming out of this and they're expecting the economy to slowly go back to normal, and we certainly hope that's the case.
And I think more so, you probably found there were businesses there who legitimately have had drops in turnover because certain circumstances in the business for a particular month, that probably if they didn't get Jobkeeper would still be fine. But I think that was the intended consequence. It was too hard to tailor it and and spend time to tailor, and they just said, well, we're just casting that everybody gets it. Clearly this time they've had more time to think about the second round and are therefore making sure that it's going to the businesses it intends to. And look, my advice and our advice always been, always look for these, what's the government doing, what are the support they're giving. It's a time they really need to be pumping it in. And I don't believe, I really don't believe that the grants or the assistance will finish in March, because it's now, okay, this is about resilience and survival at the moment. When we come out of it, they've got to support businesses to come out as well. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah. I think it's important. You made an important point just in finishing, that it's an opportunity now for businesses to bring everything up to date.
Yeah.
Certainly it means that you can check your eligibility on a lot of these grants and criteria, but also it just means, look, I think things are quieter generally. I think there's a lot on personal fronts where we can catch up on, but certainly from a business perspective, tax, BAS returns, all that sort of thing. Now's the time to do it. Catch up, and that way you don't have anyone.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly right.
All right, Chris. Thanks very much for the discussion, and we're obviously the message is that there's still a lot of grants and opportunities there. Bring your information up to date. Contact us if you need any help with that. Contact us if you need any guidance around the eligibility and applying for these grants, Jobkeeper and the like. And so we're always available to take any questions and queries. But thanks for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay.